Oscaway the Tompawag. Hello friends, my name is Mish Conley. I'm one of the educators here at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum, and today I'm going to be teaching you guys a traditional craft, or a more modernized version of a traditional craft, of crafting our instruments for our traditional singing. And today we're going to be making some drumsticks. You can use household items and kind of industrial items that you find at your regular hardware store, and these are the materials that we use to craft our drumsticks and what we use to sing when we do traditional events or just singing around the drum with our friends and family. So traditionally, our instruments were made out of wood and animal skins. Today, we're using more modern materials. Some of the materials that we have today are our standard driveway marker. You can find these at any local hardware store. And there's many different lengths and widths and flexibilities. I prefer ones that are more flexible. It gives you more bounce out of your drumstick. We have leather, which is pretty standard amongst the board. We've, of course, been using this for really long time, right? And we also have different kinds of tapes to decorate our drumstick. Duct tape, which will be your kind of structural integrity and basis for your shapes and your padding. We have sports wrap. This will also contribute to the shape and padding of your drumstick. Back in the day, people used to use cut up strips of sheet. I've seen people use yarn. So there's a lot of different ways that you can go about crafting this. But I'm going to show you the techniques that I learned and picked up over my career of crafting and singing and stick making. And we're just going to take it from there, and you can try this at home, and you can also expand upon it and get creative and see what other kind of things that you can make with the materials. All right, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your standard driveway marker, right? And you're going to want to pop the tab or the little blue thing that reflects right off of it. And these things aren't really attached. These things are just kind of stuck in there. So what I like to do is I like to stick the tab between my feet, and we're going to pull, and it pops right off, just like that. So once your sticks are kind of stripped of the reflector piece, you're going to want to take your tape measure, old reliable right here, and you're going to want to measure for the length that you want your drumstick to be, okay? Now, I feel like 23 inches is pretty comfortable for the length of a drumstick. It also helps with the balance and the weight. And most drums really aren't super duper big. Most drums are only going to be about 32 inches across maximum, unless you're making a really, really big drum. But the stick, you only need so much stick, to be comfortable singing at the drum, right? So this is what we're going to do. We're going to take our tape measure. Actually, I have this backwards. We're going to measure this for about 23 inches. And we're going to do this from the flat end because we want the most even result possible, okay? All right, 23 inches. Make sure I have a marker in here. One thing I am not is organized. So I have a pen. Well, that should do. We're going to try it out. If it even works. It does work. It's fantastic. Somehow I actually feel like a pen is better because you get a more accurate mark. All right. So marking that at 23 inches will give us about 2 drumsticks per rod. So what I like to do is I like to make sets of sticks. I used to make single sticks all the time, but now I primarily make drumstick sets. So actually, if we measure this at 23 inches, we'll actually be short on the other side. So what we're going to do is we're going to shorten that. We're going to measure this completely to length and then divide in half. So we're rocking with about 44 inches. So if we made these drumsticks 22 inches, we should get the results that we are looking for. So sometimes measuring can take you a little bit longer, but just like carpentry, you measure twice, cut once. So we're going to measure this for 22 instead of 23. And I'll just put a 2 there so I know that's where it is. There we go. Now when we cut this, it should be pretty much even. So yeah, about 1 inch of space. So 22 inches should be fine. If anything, we could do 22 and a half. That shouldn't be too bad either. So let's realign this just to double check. So if I did 22 and a half, still a bit short. So we'll cut them at 22, and that's fine by us. So once you get these marked, you're gonna take your trusty hacksaw, or if you have a table saw with the blade that can cut through fiberglass, that's good to use too. I prefer this method only because it's, you know, you have more control over your marks and your cuts, right? So we're gonna take these outside and we're gonna get to hacking. All right, well, I don't have a work table, so we're gonna use this old trusty chair right here. And you really should be using protective gear, gloves and goggles, but I don't have any of that because we're old fashioned around here. So we're gonna mark where our cut is, or cut where our mark is. Same thing, you get the idea. And just like that, we're through our rods. Then we just gotta line them up, make sure they're about even. That looks pretty all right. I'm not upset about that. Not upset at all. I like it. Looks good. Follow me. All right, so now that we have our rods cut, we're gonna come back inside and we're gonna grab our duct tape. Now our duct tape is going to be the basis for our handles as well as the foundation for our heads, okay? So when it's done, it's gonna look a little something like this, okay? This is actually part of another set I'm currently working on, but this is how you measure your handles as well as the length of your heads, okay? It also gives you weight and thickness, all right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our duct tape and we are going to line it up with the very edge of our rod, okay? We start at the ends and we work our way towards the middle, okay? It's much easier to do that, all right? So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna wrap. I like to hold the tape here and twist the rod. Some people will, you know, pin the tape and roll the rod. There's a lot of different ways you can put duct tape on, but you want it to be nice and tight and you want your tape to be even. So we're just gonna wrap until we get the desired thickness for our basis for our handle, okay? So it can be a little bit time consuming, but I also make sure that I'm specific about the duct tape that I use, right? A lot of people can just buy regular old duct tape, but it's not really that good for this craft only because it tears very easily and it's also not as thick, right? With this Gorilla Tape, it gives you the desired thickness and you actually don't have to wrap as many times as you would with regular duct tape. So you look at that. Right now we have our desired thickness, I'd say about the size of a nickel, maybe a little bit smaller, right? And when you add your layers to it, it's gonna add thickness comfortable to your hand, okay? So what you're gonna do is you're gonna repeat this process and you're gonna repeat this 4 times for the handle and 3 times for the head, okay? I find that having a longer handle, and I wouldn't say a short head, but a head not as long as your handle, it allows you to have a good counterweight, a good balance, and it looks a little bit sleeker, you know? You want to make sure that you can differentiate between the handle itself and the head itself. So we're gonna make our handle. All right, now that we have our handle all the way rolled out, it should look something like this. 4 strips is the length on this, and the width is about the size of a nickel. So when you hold it, you'll get a nice solid grip for your handle. It gives you space for your thumb and the rest of your hand. It's also quite comfortable. You don't want your handle to be too thick or too thin because then it will feel weird once you apply your counterweight. All right, so it should look something like this. All right, and now we've also done the same on the opposite side as the basis for our head. Now notice what I've done is I've made this one a little bit thinner, and I've also added a taper, and I've sectioned it off so that way when we start rolling out our heads, it'll have a nice gradual taper towards the neck of the head. And it'll give us a smooth transition into the more creative art side of decorating our drumstick, right? So this is going to be our basis. Right now we kind of have our weight set, and we also have the width of our handle set. So now what we need to do is we need to start using our sports wrap, and we're going to start rolling our head out. All right, now that we've got our heads rolled out to the desired thickness, I'm going to put a piece of tape there to kind of hold the material to itself. All right, so it should look something just like this. Now, I prefer to do this shape just because it's nice and round and it gives you a nice taper. I've also seen cone shapes. Some singers even do flat-headed sticks, and maybe in another video I'll show you how to do a flat-head drumstick. But for now, this is what we're gonna do. So we're gonna cover this one more time. And once it's covered with our protective tape here, I'm using hockey tape, but you can use electrical tape or kind of whatever tape you feel comfortable with that you know is gonna hold the material down. We're just going to cover this up just like so. Just like that, it's going to hold our material nice and tight to the drumstick. Okay? Boom. So it should look something just like this. So when you use it, this is what you'll be hitting the drum with. And it has just enough padding, and it's just solid enough where it won't come apart. You'll be able to get the sound out of your drum, and it also won't hurt that animal hide when you hit it. You know, when we hit our drums, you know, we're in tune with our drums. We're not trying to hurt that animal or the spirit of that animal, right? So this is what your head is going to look like. Now we just need to choose our leather and our colors so we can design it and get to the fun part and the creative part. And also a more tedious part with the sewing, but we'll get to that. All right, so this is our leather bin here. We got a whole bunch of really cool colors. These are all pieces that I've collected personally over the years, whether through trades with other stick makers or, you know, just the annual stop at Tandy Leather, you know. So got a couple bags of scrap, but we're gonna scrap these bags, haha, puns. And we're actually gonna pick a real color here. So we have a whole bunch to choose from. Everything from blues and oranges to teals. You can design your drumstick however you'd like to. I want to make sure the piece that I use is actually big enough to do the entire project. So, yeah, give me a second and I'll come back to you with some colors. All right, so we've chosen our colors. We're going to go with this turquoise color, and we're also going to use black as a base color. And these are going to kind of contrast each other and make the colors pop and look really cool once we're finished designing. These are also some of the colors that are on the Mashantucket Pequot tribal seal, which is pretty cool. So I think it's fitting, right? So this is what we're gonna do. We've chosen a base tape color to cover our rod with. And this is also going to help the leather pop, and is also going to look really cool as a background color when we start putting on the actual designs of our drumstick, right? So this is what we're going to do. We are actually going to cut a strip of this. We're going to measure this so that way when we make our cut, we're not using more than we need to. And I think that's one thing that is kind of prominent with indigenous people, is that we try to not waste our materials and utilize every bit that's useful. So I'm only gonna make a small incision, and then we're gonna cut this strip out just like so. We'll set that to the side, and we are gonna stick this on the long way, and this is going to be the base of our drumstick. This is gonna be the base color. So now that that's on there like that, we're just going to smooth that out like so. Everybody, this is my good buddy Connor Smith.
How you guys doing today?
He's one of the other educators here at the museum, and he is also a singer too. And I have been making sticks and hanging out with this guy for a little over 10 years now. And he's going to join me for the remainder of our program today.
So what are we doing, man?
Hey, just real quick, everybody, I want to take the time to introduce my good buddy Connor. I've known this guy for a little over 10 years. He's one of the other educators here at the museum. And he's going to be joining us for the remainder of our program. He's also learned stick making techniques, and he's going to help me share with you guys and make things a little bit more interesting.
So what are we doing, Mish?
Well, right now we are about to stick the leather on. So we've chosen turquoise and black for our colors, and they're pretty reminiscent of the tribal seal, right? So I figured it'd be appropriate. And so now we're just deciding on whether or not we're going to do this half and half, or if we're going to do the solid colors. What do you think? Half and half?
That sounds good.
Half and half sounds great. All right, we're probably going to do a solid handle though for the sake of time here, though. Right on. So what we're gonna do? There we go.
So what we're doing right now is, as we have the full sheets of leather, or at least partial sheets of leather, but you can see some of the leather is not as quality as the others. Some might have scratches on it. Some might have these peeling parts. So we're gonna go through the hide, and we're going to find a piece of leather that we think would look good for the stick. That way, it lines up well. And I think I'm going to use, well, let me see this.
Yep.
So I'm looking at this little strip right here, which looks nice, and I want to make as little scrap as possible. That way I'm not doing any waste. So we might actually be able to use this little tiny bit right here. It seems like it'll just go around, but that would be cutting it really close. What do you think, Mish?
That won't be a bad thing. We can always use the black to patch up the other side.
Actually, now that I'm looking at it, we should also make a decision if we want to do suede side out or not suede.
I agree with the suede side, and I also think it'll look better with the stitches too.
Yeah, I think the suede side looks good. you go. If you
Alrighty. Can I also borrow those black scissors? Because those seem to be the
good ones.
yeah, the better pair. Matter of fact.
If we're doing half and half on the head, are you doing is black on top or black on bottom?
Probably black on the bottom.
All right. So this would be the top. So let's just.
Yeah, those
How
are.
far down do you want the blue to go? Like, 'cause I could just
whatever you feel.
I could just cut this square off,
Perfect.
and it would kind of make
Perfect.
no waste. And yeah, let's do it. Sometimes we gotta listen to the leather.
You know? All right, so what we've done is we have trimmed the leather. We have stuck the leather on. We've used tape wrap backwards as a placeholder. There's a lot of stick makers who are really good at freehanding this and keeping the leather straight and the stitches aligned and their trim cuts precise. But today we're going to use a placeholder just to kind of ensure that our stitch and the lines that we cut are even enough to look very nice once the finished product is complete.
One thing that I like to do sometimes is I like to have one side really straight before I put the leather on there. That way I can line the other side of the leather up and know it's going to be a straight line. So sometimes when I'm cutting, especially my handles, I like to put a strip of duct tape down on the leather so it creates the straight line and the guide to be able to start it. Then you could peel it off, stick it onto the tape, and then when you fold the leather over, it kind of tells you exactly where to cut on that leather, so you really get a straight seam on your handle.
Yep. So what I've done is I've trimmed it well enough to when I start stitching it, it will line up nice and straight. So it kind of looks a little jagged, but once we start stitching and pulling it, it will line up just beautifully. And I've also left a little bit of access on either ends, so that way we can tie them off and fringe them, and it'll give the stick a nice fancy look once it's completed and all sewn up.
So one thing that you could do, especially with, depending on the leather that you use, some leather is going to have more stretch than others. So you could see if I was just to fold this up regular, it wouldn't necessarily line up very well with this edge. So I could actually pull a little bit and bring it to a point where it's going to line up a lot more. So I'm just going to do a rough cut before we even put the tape on the top to help stick it. That way I could kind of get a baseline of where to start cutting from. These are nice scissors. There we go. That way when it comes time to start, I'll at least have a baseline to start trimming from. I'm going to do tape.
Sure. All right, so same process as the handle. What we're going to do is we're going to wrap the tape backwards so the sticky side is on the outside. And typically what I like to do when I'm doing my sticks that are, you know, half one color, half the other, is I'll start at the top. I'll make sure that the top part or the tip of the stick is covered. And the reason I do that is so that way when I go to cover the remainder of the stick.
Oh, other way. Switch that out.
You're right. Mistakes happen. When I go to cover the remainder of the stick, it's not a lot of measuring. So I only have this much left to cover. So what we can do is we can cut a square that will cover just that. And then this is my measuring edge right here. So now that the leather is stuck on, we have our good seam. And now we have a space where we can trim. So this side can stay just like that. We're going to trim the right side just a little bit. Right? So now that we've reached the part where both pieces can get trimmed, what I'll do is I'll pinch them together and then I will cut up just like this. So now Both sides are trimmed so they're mostly flush. That should be fine.
One thing to remember while you're trimming, this is kind of a part that I feel like takes some attention, because when you make your cuts, that's going to kind of structure how straight your stitch is going to be.
It's like being a barber.
Yeah, but like everything else, remember that it is much easier to cut off more than to cut off too much and add on. So just be cautious as you go and really take your time. Yeah, that's good.
Alright, so we're gonna trim this down. Make sure it's flush. And then we're gonna trim this down. Make sure this is flush. Right, so now our cuts are pretty even, and we're gonna make sure that it's flush with the neck transition. Right on. Now we have enough access to fringe our stick and sew it so it's even, and it will look straight once it's finished. And so now all that's left to do is to sew this up. Now I've started stitching this up. Now that I've trimmed this to the shape of the drumstick, what I've been doing is I've been using kind of like an under-over technique. So I'll start on the inside of the leather and I'll pull through. And I always pull in the direction that I'm stitching, because that's going to make the line when it comes together nice and straight in the direction that you cut it in. So you won't really have to make too many more trims at this point, unless it's really, really out of line. But once you pull it tight, it comes together nice and smooth, just like that. Okay, so now that we've made it to our halfway point with stitching, now we're going to introduce the second color into our stitch pattern, right? So a lot of people typically would stitch this part together before stitching all the way down. But me, what I've done is I've made my string extra long. So what I do is I'll stitch down and I'll stitch around and I'll stitch it down again, all in one go. That way nothing's kind of getting scrunched up. It keeps the same consistency in the stitch. So what we'll do is we'll put a stitch into the black. Since it's connected to the blue, we'll put a stitch into the black, just like so. And we'll pull them together. Notice how I'm pulling diagonally and not with the stitch. If I pulled it this way, what it will do is it will pull this stitch to the left. And we don't want that, right? So I'm going to pull this way so it closes that stitch. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to continue the stitch pattern. But this time it'll be a little bit more up and down, right? So what this does is it will close over just like so. And booyah, now we can start pulling in the direction that our stitch is going, because it's going to pull that lip over and it's not really going to affect the straightness of the down stitch. And then we just continue our stitch. See, nice and together. And notice how I'm also stitching really close to the edge. So, excuse me. Typically I would use a smaller needle and I would stitch kind of close to the edge. That way we get a nice seam, and it also makes the stitches look nice and close together. Nice uniform stitch. It's not chunky, it's not pulling too far into the leather, and the leather also tears less when you do it that way. So even here, we stitch close to the seam, we pull it we pull it tight, but we don't really pull it, because you want it tight and uniform. You don't want it so tight that the leather can't move and can't have its flexibility. So we'll put another stitch in really close to the edge like so. And then all we're doing is closing the stitch. We're pulling it, but we're not pulling it super tight. All we're doing is closing the stitch. Boom. It's important to take your time, not stitch too fast, because then you're able to get into a consistent rhythm. It's all about consistency and appreciating the time it takes to do it. It's not a race.
It's okay, ready? Try again.
Wow. Woo. Good job. That was amazing.
So now we have our finished product. It is completely sewn. The handle and the head are sewn and both sides are fringed. So now all we need to do is kind of cut out our designs for the rest of our vinyl tape, and we're going to decorate the rod part of our stick. So in the next video, I'll show you the intricacies of how to do that, and we will continue then on. But thank you for joining me today, and hopefully these tips and tricks helped you with the creation of your drumstick.